Welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on within the Privacy Guides community. And this week's top stories in the data privacy and security space. Privacy Guides is a nonprofit which researches and shares privacy-related information and facilitates a community on our forum and matrix where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. Before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown on how the show will be laid out. We'll first start by covering site updates. Then we'll discuss top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Next, we'll explore some trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum. Finally, we'll answer viewer questions. If you have a question for us, please leave a comment in the forum thread or the YouTube chat. Let's get off what I've been working on lately at Privacy Guides this week. Jordan, I heard you have a few videos coming out.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. So yeah, this week we've been working on the data broker opt-out video, and that's been definitely quite interesting to work on. And there was some like last minute changes we were hoping to get going, and that's sort of what we've been working on in the meantime. So we're hoping to get that video out to our members as soon as possible, but it takes a little while to apply changes and to do that sort of thing. So we're hoping to get that video out either today, tomorrow, or possibly early next week to our members, and that video will be coming out to everybody next week on the usual time, which is, I believe, Thursday mornings for most people. So definitely look out for that. And we also have a couple of other like collaborations in the pipeline, and that's sort of going to be an interesting thing to look out for as well. So it certainly is an interesting time for our video content. But yeah, I also did a little bit of work with Em this week. I worked with her on an article about real name policies. So it's definitely an interesting topic, especially it's like sort of very important right now because we're seeing a lot of countries trying to implement these a lot of platforms trying to implement these sort of things, forcing people to provide their real names. So like I think in the article there was a couple of mentions of different platforms like LinkedIn asked that, Facebook. So it's definitely an interesting thing. And we also talked about like sort of different groups that it affects as well. I think Em wrote a lot about like Indigenous people, non-American people, like people who have like names that aren't traditionally, Anglophone names. And I think that's an important topic to cover. And then I also added some stuff about the transgender community and the LGBTQ plus community. So if you're interested in like reading about that, I think these real name policies on platforms have quite a lot of impact on communities that you wouldn't think. And I think it's sort of important to realize that these changes may not affect people in ways that you think. So I think it's important to think about the different ways that it can affect people. And that article kind of went through the entire thing there. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in that sort of topic. But yeah, what have you been working on, and what's been going on the website recently this week?
Yeah, we have actually pushed a changelog as of yesterday, I believe. Just opening it up right now. Our first major change so far is done by the amazing Jonah, who will now use Ghost Articles landing page. I don't really know what that means, but I'm assuming that we have created a landing page for Ghost. As of other changes, Mat2 GitLab links have been replaced with GitHub links by @AGLove without love, which is their first GitHub contribution. So congratulations to this user. Secondly, a new Flatpak link has been added for simple XChat by @OverwatchDude. Thirdly, Lightweight Wallet has been replaced with Light Wallet by @Samsung Galaxy Player. And fourthly, there's been a refined paragraph description added by Redoomed1. And of course, we have two recent articles. The first one written by Jordan M. Congratulations again. I read it. Amazing piece. I feel like I learned a lot personally on how like rename policies can not only affect a lot of marginalized groups, but are also an unfortunate combination with age verification, a repeated topic in the show. Much needed collaboration. Jordan, please write again for sure. If you're not too busy with videos and podcasts and all of that. And finally, I completely forgot to spotlight this last time. But privacy enhancing technology series. Currently is being authored by Freya, one of our contributing members in this forum, and they've written like an amazing article on differential privacy, which just to summarize, and it's the way of adding like noise to statistical analysis and data collection methods, which way individuals can't be identified from a data set. It seems very complex, very mathematical when I first learned it in university, but Freya did an amazing job of breaking it down for folks to understand better. So if you're really interested in learning how data collection can be mitigated to better reflect privacy practices, definitely read his article on differential privacy. And yeah, that's all we had in our recent changelog. More exciting things to come up. If you have any suggestions for forum topics or potential additions to the forum community, please suggest so, and we'll make sure to get back. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for our changelog. But we can definitely talk about our first story, which is about GrapheneOS, everyone's favorite ROM on Android. So in this story, written by 9to5 Google, GrapheneOS, in a series of Reddit comments and discussions on their forum itself, have confirmed that their next device will be a Snapdragon-powered phone, which is exciting news because if you ever own a GrapheneOS device before, you probably have been familiar with Pixel devices having really underpowered and inefficient tensor chips, which is like the CPU that it runs on. So exciting news. We're glad to see like Graphene branch out and have found a new OEM partner and potentially have a more longer partnership. But I'm going to quickly read over this article. GrapheneOS is a security-focused Android experience that to date has been available solely on Google Pixel devices. Soon, though, a major OEM will be added to GrapheneOS's support list, with Snapdragon-powered devices coming soon. In a comment on Reddit, the team behind GrapheneOS has confirmed plans to start offering devices other than Google Pixel smartphones at a similar price. These Snapdragon-powered devices are coming from a major OEM that remains unnamed in the post. Like Pixel support, users of whatever devices ends up being would be able to install GrapheneOS on hardware that wasn't running Graphene out of the box. Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is also mentioned, and it's also directly confirmed that whatever device this is has yet to be released. So what could it be? The most likely answer here, personally I disagree with this, but whatever, is OnePlus, which started off its history with CyanogenMod as its OS. But it's a little hard to say for given recent changes the brand has made in regards to its bootloader security. In its further tread, GrapheneOS says that it's one of the major OEMs, and they're definitely serious about working with us, while adding that it is not Fairphone, as some has speculated. Now, just add in, there has been a lot of conversation of more about which OEM could it be. We love speculation, that's the favorite thing we do before any official confirmation has been announced. Naturally, Graphene has to be a little mysterious about who this OEM is, pending an official announcement by the OEM itself. You don't want to announce a partnership before it's actively formalized. So smart move by Graphene here. This article specifically mentions OnePlus and the whole Opal family of devices, which is definitely one of the top 10 devices out there and has historically supported bootloader unlocking and custom ROMs. But personally for me, I speculate that it could be Motorola. Not sure if it's in the top 10 list of Android OEMs worldwide though by market share, but Motorola has previously been really friendly to bootloader unlocking and custom ROMs development. Not sure about the security practice specifically, but then again, speculation is speculation. I've seen people in the forum really want Sony to be the OEM in question, since they still have a headphone jack, SD card slot, and a lot of folks really love the design of these phones as well. But Jordan, what do you think? What do you think will be the OEM in question?
That's definitely a good question. I think a lot of people were hoping that it wouldn't be like a Chinese OEM like OnePlus. But I think when we look at like the trend in like the global market share of Android, I think like the majority of the OEMs that are like in the top 10 are like Chinese ones. So it's probably more likely that it will be a Chinese OEM, but obviously we can't really we don't know for sure, I guess, at this point, but I think considering OnePlus's history, it could be possible. And I don't know, I'm personally a fan of Motorola as well, but they are technically like Motorola is technically an American company, but they're owned by Lenovo now, so like Lenovo's like a Chinese company, or I think Hong Kong, but and I think that's sort of is an interesting it's an interesting thing to see coming. I know the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is like pretty damn spectacular when it comes to performance, and I think that would just be huge from like a hardware standpoint because we're seeing a lot of devices, especially like the Pixel devices and a lot of those Motorola devices, they're more like mid-range performance devices. So it'd be really good to see like something with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5. I mean, it's interesting that they're saying that it will be I think I've been reading through some of the stuff they're talking about, but they said it would be a similar price to the Pixels. And I think that's probably around the same price as like, most flagships at this point. So, I mean, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is not particularly a mid-range chip. So I'm going to assume this is going to be somewhat of a more premium device. So I do wonder, like, if we'll see the possibility of having some more mid-range options for people that are a bit more affordable, because I know that some people in like the global south, where currency is less valuable and there's import tariffs and all sorts of things, it can be really hard to get a Pixel and they're kind of expensive as well. And especially with the import tariffs, I know like Brazil and like some countries in like Southeast Asia, it's very expensive to buy Pixels. So I think it would be really cool if we saw like one of these Chinese OEMs or even just like, I know nothing. I can't remember I don't know where they're from exactly. I think they might be.
Yeah, they're British based, but the founder is known for starting the international division at Oppo, which would become OnePlus. But yeah, I think like a lot of people did wish for nothing, because fancy design. They also support bootloader unlocking. But the issue is, of course, like they are apparently an AI first company. Maybe it's just Carpe trying to get more investors to fund his company, of course, but I don't think they're one of the top 10 Android OEMs yet, even though they have achieved like a shocking success lately in terms of phone sales, especially like across the global south, not necessarily like the US, for example. But as for budget phones, though, like I do feel like, yes, a lot of folks really don't like Chinese OEMs for privacy and security reasons. And they're not completely wrong. Like there has been a documented history of Chinese OEMs failing to respond to zero-day vulnerabilities or actively collecting your data themselves through bloatware, especially if you're based in a country with a certain like phone that's considered more budget. It seems to me that the flagship level phones of these Chinese OEMs tend to be less bloated, but the more mid-range or budget phones tend to have more bloatware to subsidize the cost of it. So it's a bit of a touchy issue where would these OEMs actually want like budget phones to be bootloader unlockable? And imagine if someone can remove like all the adware and bloat on a device by just simply replacing the operating system itself, And I don't know if like it will ever be a budget option potentially, like in the $200-$300 range. But I do see like a cost-effective phone being released. Something like, for example, OnePlus like lineup. For example, there's the OnePlus Nord. There's the OnePlus like whatever number they have. So 13S and then the 13. And the 13 is supposed to be like a flagship killer, competing with the very expensive like $1,000 plus phones for only $800-$900, while the S series tends to be like competing with the $700, $99 phones, while being costing like $200 less, I believe. And then there's a Nord, which is even cheaper. So I think potentially we could have like a mid-range phone that could be support GrapheneOS, but I don't know if like it'll be like, considered accessible by the majority of the population who can only really afford $200, $300 phones. I think like it's kind of a given to have some sort of like bloatware and adware infested device. That's how these companies like subsidize it, unfortunately.
I think like that is a good point, right? Like a lot of the cheaper devices usually have that sort of bloatware, but also like I think one thing that's interesting is like some of the GrapheneOS like device requirements that they had for a long time was with the Titan M2 security chip. And as far as I know, that's like sort of somewhat specific to Google Pixels, and they said they wouldn't really support any other devices. Like I know they specifically, in this article actually, it says that it's not Fairphone. They've already said it's not Fairphone.
Mm.
And I know they've always had sort of issues with Fairphone. I know that Fairphone has been somewhat negligent when it comes to like customer ROMs. Like they've left the test signing keys on there, and it's been a bit like the secure boot isn't as secure as it could be.
Yeah.
And I think they did say that they're still keeping the same requirements. So it does sound like they might be having like a third party OEM like implementing some sort of secure enclave specifically
Mm.
just for GrapheneOS, because that is like sort of a baseline level of security that they require, which helps protect against like, brute forcing and that sort of thing. So it's interesting, and I think it's definitely something to watch, but I think at this point there was a lot of like speculation on, especially on the forum, there was a lot of speculation about who this would be. And I think, healthy speculation is good, but I think we can't really make any specific claims on who it's going to be at this point. But I think it's, I know that like GrapheneOS said that they were originally a couple of years ago, they did say they were working on like releasing a device with an OEM, which never really happened. So I'm hoping that this actually does pull through and they do end up actually having a good relationship with some OEM to produce a device that hopefully will be more accessible to people, because yeah, like I said, the Google Pixel is expensive. It's only available in certain countries, and I think that it would be really good to see more um, more sovereignty away from Google, because right now they do have kind of a lot of control over whether GrapheneOS continues. And like we've already seen, QPR1, Android 16 QPR1, which is like the first quarter patch for Android 16, is still not released. Like the source code hasn't been released so that GrapheneOS can't add it. And we're already seeing like beta 3, like for QPR2. So like we're kind of moving past QPR1 at this point, and it's sort of worrying to see that it's taking so long. I know they said they've got backported changes, like security fixes from their OEM that they're working with, and that's sort of one of the new features they've added with the Security Express release channel that they've added in like the latest version of GrapheneOS. So it's definitely concerning, especially when QPR1 isn't out. And I think it's sort of we're going to need this sooner than later, because like there is a concern that Google might actually pull the plug on releasing their source code. I mean, we don't really know for sure, but it definitely seems like they're taking their sweet time, especially with QPR1 like taking so long at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. I agree 100%. If I remember properly, just from like hearsay and online forum like watching, like it does appear that a lot of it does stem from incompetence from Google itself, not necessarily some sort of malice. I'm not sure what's worse, honestly. Like Google crumbling apart because of layoffs and overwork and disorganized management, or Google actively wanting to pull the plug on open source. Uh, They officially stated they're committed to open source. GrapheneOS confirmed themselves that they will support Pixel 10. It's not like a question of whether they will. They will support it. It's just that it's going to take a while. But on a highlight though, like something that I have noticed though is that Graphene has also not confirmed whether they'll support the Pixel 11. They seemed rather hesitant. I feel like if you don't know like whether it's for your device, you would just say, "Oh, we don't know yet." But it seems to me like they haven't really like said, "Okay, the Pixel 11 is definitely will be supported if that happen. It appears to me like they're hoping for the OEM partnership to work out very well, so that if Google does pull some move in the future, they may like have more flexibility to not be completely reliant on Google, which is I think the whole point of this partnership, which is good honestly. Like I think no one like project focus specifically on one brand. Clearly, Google has a lot of issues to like fix themselves. If they're still like committed to open source, quote unquote. But I also want to emphasize that this problem has been impacting a lot of like open source like projects too, or specifically like maintaining a specific like drivers and patches specifically. Um, for example, Intel, they have received a lot of massive layoffs, causing like entire teams to be shuttered. Teams that were formerly maintaining and pushing patches for the open source community, especially those are the Linux community relies on. And we see developers who were the sole maintainers of entire like drivers disappear, or now they're selling like maintaining multiple drivers and packages. So it's definitely a huge concern across the industry of where, okay, we're overworked, just not enough people like actually maintain everything. Maybe it's just companies just don't have the resources to do so because of the current like market, which is sad. But this only reinforces Graphene's decision to find someone else. And I think with an external OEM partner, wherever they are, like I hope like it has give them access to security patches early on. And I hope that by having a new phone and by supporting both the Pixel, hopefully, and this new OEM, we can like do some mitigation of potential damage if Google one day pulls the plug and drops all like custom ROM support. I think like this will definitely ensure that Graphene will survive that scenario.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good like decision for the long run, definitely, and I think that's hopefully going to be like the default option for people. Like they don't have to buy a Google Pixel anymore because it's always sort of the meme of like I'm going to de-Google by buying a Google phone. It's like doesn't really make that much sense, right? But I think having another option for people is going to be kind of huge. And there were some comments in the YouTube chat from people. People saying they were wishing it's Sony could be cool as well. And yeah, Sony's like, I don't know. I feel like do they sell their phones in the US?
No, they exited the market because no one's buying them anymore, which is so sad because they used to be like one of the largest like like providers like across the world. Like with the whole Ericsson lineup, I recall back in the day, like late 2000s, early 2010s, like Sony was somewhat popping. Like I remember like they even had like a PlayStation phone or something, the Xperia Play. And I remember looking at the ads for it. And I was like, oh my god, I want it so bad. And now like to see Sony like completely exit the market and only focus on Asia mostly, I believe. Like I heard that their entire market is essentially Asian or specifically Japanese like businessmen who don't really know better. They overcharge them and then occasionally have discounts like regular pricing because their phones are expensive, but they still have headphone jack and they still have SD cards, so it's okay. It's okay. Like I'm sure there's a lot of like devoted fans out there willing to import them from these markets. But yeah, like Sony phones are historically known for like being really friendly towards the open source community and allowing bootloader unlocking. So I've always wanted one, but I don't know. It's not seeming likely unless they somehow have a massive discount for this new model.
Yeah, I remember I specifically remember, I think I had like one of the Sony Xperia phones. I think that was like later on, like after like the Ericsson Aurora or whatever, however you say that. That like that was like sort of the like main like flagship smartphone thing. I think they do. I feel like they do still sell them in Australia. So I don't know. It's definitely sort of an interesting thing, right, with Sony. I don't know. I don't really feel like I miss SD cards that much or headphone jacks. So maybe I'm just like, maybe that's like a hot take, I guess. But I just find that I use USB-C headphones, like USB-C earbuds, and I don't really run out of storage because I like keep everything in the cloud. So I don't know. Maybe that's kind of a hot take, but I do kind of vividly remember the option in like Android 6 or something, Android 7, where you could use your SD card as like internal storage and like store your apps on it, which was pretty cool. And that was like later removed because it was like kind of slow. But yeah, it's sort of it's interesting to see that. I think it would be cool if they had that on the new GrapheneOS phone, but I think personally I value like the other things a bit more, like build quality and like the, I guess, quality of the like I don't know, like the a good display, high quality components, that sort of thing, more than like an SD card or like a headphone jack. But yeah, I'm personally hoping it's just a high quality device that's similar to like an iPhone or a Pixel, because um, I think there's definitely like a very like large discrepancy in like build quality, and I feel like Google Pixels have only just sort of caught up with iPhones, like especially like the Pixel 9 series. I feel like it's kind of nailed it down, and they were kind of trailing a little bit for a while, because Apple is sort of known for having such high quality premium devices. Um, so it'll definitely be interesting to see where it goes. Um, so yeah, that's sort of. Do you have anything more to add on this article, Kevin?
Um, Besides adding further speculation, I don't think so. But we can always revisit this topic though later. I think there's a lot of people on the forum who have a lot of hot takes on which phone would be.
Yeah, I did see we had a couple of good questions in the forum thread, which we'll get to later. So if you do have any questions for us, do make sure to leave them in like the YouTube chat or in the forum thread, and we'll get to those later on. But with that being said, I guess we should move on to the next story here, and that is about Framework Computer. And basically, there was a secure boot bypass which threatens nearly 200,000 Linux framework laptops. So, if in case you haven't heard of Framework before, they're kind of a notorious like repairable computer company, and they sort of build their devices around like sustainability, repairability, allowing you to keep using the device. Instead of having to buy a new one, you can just buy replacement parts, such as like the chassis, the keyboard, all that sort of stuff is replaceable. Even the ports on the laptop is. And they've sort of long been thought of as like a really ideal Linux laptop brand because they have sort of more openness, I guess, which I'm not sure if that's particularly true, but yeah, there was basically a secure boot bypass that was around 200,000 Linux computer systems from American computer maker Framework were shipped with signed UEFI shell components that could be exploited by secure boot protections to bypass secure boot protections. So basically, an attacker could take advantage to load bootkits such as Black Lotus, Hybrid Petya, and Bootkitty that can evade OS level security controls and persist across OS reinstalls. So I think that's quite concerning that there's like sort of a vulnerability this this powerful, especially because yeah, it's gonna be able to avoid being removed, especially when like a lot of people think that like reinstalling your operating system is like the silver bullet for protecting your computer if you think you might have a virus. So kind of getting into like the more specifics of this, I'm just going to quote from the article because this is a little bit technical, and this is the section called Powerful Command. According to firmware security company Eclipsium, the problem stems from including a memory modifier command in legitimately signed UEFI shells that Framework shipped with its systems. So basically, the command provides direct read and write access to system memory and is intended for low-level diagnostics and firmware debugging. However, it can be leveraged to break the secure boot trust chain by targeting the gsecurity2 variable, a critical component in the process of verifying the signatures of UEFI modules. So yeah, basically they kind of made like a little bit more of a they put a quote from Eclipsium here. Once the address is identified, the command can overwrite security handler pointer with null or redirect it to a function that always returns success without performing any verification. So yeah, this is kind of quite concerning that this is happening, but I do think like secure boot on like desktop operating systems has always been quite flimsy, and I think trusting secure boot is not the greatest thing ever, but I think that the fact that this can be exploited to basically install a bootkit on your system, which can evade like OS level security controls and persist across reinstalls, is quite concerning. So especially when this sort of secure boot system can be leveraged to basically apply malware like that, that is definitely quite a concerning vulnerability. And basically the US-based hardware company said that the the Eclipsium researchers said that it only impacted around 200,000 framework computers, including the Framework 13 11th gen Intel, which is fixed planned in 3.24 version of firmware, the Framework 13 12th gen Intel, the Framework 13th gen Intel, the Framework 13 Intel Core Ultra, the Framework 13 AMD Ryzen 7040, and the Framework 13 AMD Ryzen AI 300, the Framework 16 AMD Ryzen 7040, and the Framework Desktop AI 300 Max. So yeah, it's definitely important. If you have any of those devices, definitely check your operating system patches. I believe a lot of this will be automatically installed on Linux and on on Windows. And I think that you should definitely make sure you're applying these patches because yeah, there's malware that can exploit this.
Yeah, I really want to like direct this conversation not necessarily towards like the topic of bootkits and the specific patch, because I think we both can agree that it's really hard to recommend a situation where, okay, secure boot is bypassed. What do you do? And there isn't really a lot you can really particularly do unless like you are a professional yourself that can actually diagnose this. For a lot of folks, like we don't really know like when oh, we have a bootkit or not. So it's really really difficult. But we can definitely talk about, however, its framework itself and their very disturbing trend of not applying firmware updates to a standard, which is seen in other OEMs as well. Of course, like framework has acknowledged this issue and they're trying to improve it, and I'm really glad to see that as of like this article's released, they've fixed quite a lot of patches so far, and we just honestly kudos to them. Any improvement, they're a smaller company, we can't expect them to reach that same level of support that a company like Lenovo would or Dell. But it is still a concern though, particularly of not receiving prompt firmware updates. Of course, like it's a bit of a like hit and miss though. Like, do we actually recommend laptops from larger OEMs, or do we want to like prioritize a philosophy and help that company reach a point where yes, they will end up having a larger team to fully like support these updates. It's a bit of a mixed bag, unfortunately, and I love Framework and what they do, of course, but there isn't a particular like way in which I can be like, okay, for folks with higher threat models, should you get a Framework laptop or a Lenovo ThinkPad that's still currently in support? Ideally, you want the ThinkPad itself if you really prioritize framework updates. Firmware updates, but Framework has an amazing philosophy, and then that's a company that should be supported. Repairability is currently on a downhill so far, and I don't want to like downplay like their mission statement at all. But Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is sort of like a problem with like the desktop security model, I guess, especially when it comes to like PCs, I suppose. They don't really prioritize a lot of the protections that we see on like, for instance, like MacBooks and macOS devices. They have a much more secure, like verified boot chain, and I think that sort of definitely provides a high level of security. I'd say like this is probably not particularly likely to be exploited on your system, but I think it's still important to make sure you're updated and I think also this isn't to say you shouldn't use secure boot. I think you definitely should still use secure boot and enable as many protections as you can on your system, like using TPM, using secure boot, using like all the available security protections that your BIOS and system platform allows. But I think, yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about this in like the Secure Blue video that we did, but Linux in general does have quite a lot of, I guess, shortfalls when it comes to security. And I think that it's good to be aware of it, but I think in a lot of cases, the privacy benefits of using Linux and avoiding macOS and Windows is definitely going to be outweighing the security risks for a lot of people. But I think, yeah, if your security concerns are much higher, then obviously something like a Chromebook or a MacBook might be more of an option. But then again, in that case, you're losing the privacy benefits, but it's sort of a juggling game on what's going to be the most effective for your use case. So it's definitely interesting to think about, and yeah, it's kind of sad to see Framework not really do the greatest job when it comes to this sort of stuff. I personally was a little bit interested in them. I was looking for like a workstation laptop, and I was looking at the Framework 16, and there was just so many issues with it. Like discharging, like when it was using a lot of power, it could discharge while on the charger. Just quality issues too. So, I mean, I don't want to like completely like, throw Framework under the bus, but personally, I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think they are somewhat overhyped by a particular YouTuber. So, I mean, that definitely is
Hey.
that definitely is a little bit of the reason why I think they're so popular. But I think they're doing interesting stuff and important stuff, and we shouldn't like downplay that. But I do think there are some issues that they have, like like you said, there's issues with them releasing the firmware updates, and also this issue here where they weren't doing a proper like secure boot setup and allowing people to just like bypass it. So we should definitely keep it in mind when we recommend these sort of devices, but I think we need really more companies to do similar things to Framework, because basically no one is doing this outside Framework.
Yeah, for sure. I have heard of similar OEMs who have tried addressing the issue of like supply chain attacks and evil maid attacks, which are the sort of physical attacks that would affect a situation where secure boot is needed, of course. And if you do want to look for an OEM that at least somewhat tries to address that, you look at Nova Custom. I heard that even though they're based in Germany, um, they do support worldwide shipping, I believe. I need to double check on that. But they have something called Heads firmware, which kind of bolsters like the security model of Linux, or specifically Cube's OS, by requiring a specific USB device to be inserted for it to power on. And if you're really interested in that, definitely check out the website. As for mitigating like bootkits entirely, I think like this situation, of course, is very tough to handle. But one thing you could potentially do is consider something like Unix or Cube's OS, and using that if you believe you'll be the target of a targeted spyware attack, or specifically one that affects the bootloader, because that adds another level of protection, separating like that virtual machine from your host computer itself. I don't know whether or not it's possible for a Tails USB to also to be like infected with a bootloader attack. I'm not sure, but it seems logically that it does make sense, right? Because there is still like there isn't really a separation from the host machine at all.
Yeah, I believe it's like it actually affects like the actual like UEFI shell components. So I think that actually it still could actually infect basically anything that you boot can be affected by a bootkit, I believe. I'm not really that super familiar with like this sort of attack, so just speculating, I guess.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And furthermore, like you can also get another laptop as well that can also potentially fix it. And if you do have a laptop, Perfectly something that's disposable. You can always destroy it if you believe that a bootloader attack is something you may like face. But yeah, like I think that's enough we kind of discussed on this topic. Do you have any like final comments on framework or that whole like idea of Qubit at all?
No, not particularly. I just hope that like Framework can continue doing what they're doing and hopefully learn from this sort of stuff and like focus a bit more on security, because this is a little bit concerning. Especially because there is a lot of people that specifically bought Framework Linux for Linux. So it's interesting that this only affected the Linux computer systems, so not the Windows ones. So that's definitely an interesting thing to look out for. And yeah, if you have any of those laptops that we mentioned, definitely make sure to double check you're getting your firmware updates, because that is sort of a concern in the long run. I think it could be a concern. So definitely look out for that.
Yeah, yeah. If you're looking for the next laptop, don't avoid framework particularly, but definitely consider your threat model and perhaps consider buying either separate laptops or investing in a virtual machine setup for your workflow if you do believe that you'll be targeted by a bootkit. Um, but yeah, I think that's enough on the topic. Let's move on to our next article about Firefox, and this time it's a blog, and specifically under Distill blog. So, and just to summarize it really briefly, Mozilla has implemented quite a lot of features over the past few weeks. I personally felt very overwhelmed by the amount of features. Some good, others are rebadged, and most of them are very, very bad. Let's start with the first one. So, a new option for search, but still on your terms. Earlier this year, we gave you more choice in how you search by testing Perplexity, an AI-powered answer engine, as a search option on Firefox. Now, after positive feedback, really, we are making it a fixture, rolling it out to more users for desktop. Perplexity provides conversational answers with citations, so you can validate information without digging through pages of results. This addition reflects our shared commitment to choice. You decide when to use an AI answer engine or if you want to use it at all. Available globally, Perplexity can be found in the unified search button in the address bar. We will be bringing Perplexity to mobile in the coming months. And as always, privacy matters. Perplexity maintains strict prohibitions against selling or sharing personal data. My first thoughts on this, why like I don't get it. Personally, isn't like Firefox, didn't they already have their own AI search summary feature they're experimenting with? Or I don't know. Like I feel like it reeks of a deal that Perplexity paid Mozilla, or rather donated to Mozilla in exchange for having Perplexity being featured, in the available search engines when you like search in that browser. Um, I I never really used Perplexity. I heard that they're trying to create some sort of browser that cites a lot of uh, personal data and like information that's been effectively stolen as they scrape through the internet. I heard it's horrible for data collection practices. It essentially like steals your data. Even though they claim they won't sell or share it, obviously they'll process for their own usage. I don't think that's necessarily better at all. All in all, I think it's a really bad choice, and it reeks of some sort of deal between those two companies.
I mean, yeah, I mentioned, I saw there was people talking about this in like the Privacy Guide's Matrix channel, so definitely check that out if you're interested in like in seeing people discussing this sort of stuff. But I mentioned that, and someone said, I mean, Firefox is not going to just add a search engine like for free. They're not going to just like do something without being like monetarily compensated, and I think that's definitely what's going on here. There's definitely a deal that happened. Perplexity, probably all these like, like all these AI startup companies, they're just like getting absolutely like dumped with money, just huge amounts of money going into them. So I'm sure that they had plenty of money to have their search engine be added to Firefox. And it's kind of concerning because like I feel like a lot of people like know Firefox and Mozilla as like the privacy people, like the the people that care about your data, the people that care about like, you know, protecting you, the people who are against like that are for like the indie web, you know, like sort of these freedom fighters. But it's sort of kind of concerning to see that we're seeing them just like implementing stuff that literally nobody wants. Like they added like AI summaries of tabs. Who asked for that? It started draining people's batteries a bunch. And again, now we're seeing like Perplexity being added as a search engine option. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to delete that as soon as it pops up. Like, I don't want that in my search engine. I don't want more AI garbage. I just want it to be better. I just want the browser to be better. And Firefox has really not been doing a whole lot. Like, a lot of the stuff that they've been adding has just been stuff that I'm not interested in. Like, they've got this new Discover tab. I don't want that. I just want to have a new tab page with a search bar on it. I don't want to have all these ads for like sponsored Firefox and Mozilla products. And I think a lot of people think the same thing. They don't want to see like sponsored products and ads in their browser. And I think if they focused more on actually adding things that people wanted, like a good vertical tab integration, like Zen browser has, or like, you know, I don't know, just like literally anything else at this point. I think it's very frustrating when like it seems like they're adding all these features that are not really that relevant to people and not really what people want in a browser.
Yeah, it's I haven't used Firefox in quite some time, but I remember when I did use it, I I think I really love the idea of Firefox. We do need an alternative to Chromium-based browsers, right? But things like implementing Perplexity, it doesn't really make sense to me at all, as I've said multiple times in the past like few minutes. Um, and right now they're falling behind, you know, basic functionality as you would see in the Chromium-based browser or Zen browser, as you mentioned. But you know, I think a lot of us are so attracted to the idea of Firefox and the idea that it is the cornerstone of so many other projects as well. They're frankly amazing, like mobile browser or Tor browser. Um, like we can't discount it fully, obviously, but it's clear to me that this is a symptom of Mozilla struggling financially, and it's sad. You know, we wish that there are a lot more like high-scale donors to Mozilla, but that's not the case right now, and they're struggling for money. That's why they implemented Google as the default search engine. We all know that. I feel like that's the first thing I do when I install Firefox. I always like switch Google from DuckDuckGo to DuckDuckGo or maybe Brave. Depends on the what I'm feeling. But yeah, it's incredibly sad to see this. But I guess on a brighter note, if we can call it that, um, they have implemented a new feature called profiles. And yes, like they have something similar before. It appears to be a rebrand of what they have originally as some sort of like container profile feature. But I would say it's kind of a way for them to like restructure the GUI experience to be more like Chrome. So essentially, you know, like Chrome, if you were to have a bunch of profiles set up, it will ask you to click on the profile that you need. And you know, there's different colors you can use. And so far, it just seems to have finally reached feature parity with Chrome. I would say, with you know a better GUI experience. So I think it's nice that they finally formalized that. But you know, just to emphasize, this is a rehash of the feature they had beforehand. You could still access like you know profiles, create different profiles, have separate container tabs. Like all of that has happened in the past. It's just a more formal way of implementing it for users who would prefer a more streamlined experience. So privacy victory, UX victory, I'd say. But to go back to a sadder topic, they have announced in September a feature called Visual Search on Mozilla Connect, and they're now rolling it up for testing. But it's another fancy way of saying they're implementing Google Lens into Firefox, where if you were to right-click on an image, you will have the same functionality as Google Lens, where you can find similar products, places, or objects, copy, translate, and search text from images, or you know get potential like relevant links for you know, learning more about the topic or any sort of like things they may get from that image. and it is desktop only, but Google Lens historically has been a feature exclusive towards like Android devices and Chrome. Is that right? Like I haven't really like used Chrome in a bit, but I believe Google Lens it's like another feature that's finally been rolled out to Firefox, and I don't really know what to think about it honestly. Like this slow integration between Google and Mozilla, like it feels weird. I don't know. Like why is Google Lens like powering this feature? Like, do we really need it?
So yeah, I have some thoughts on this specifically, and I think this is worth comparing to like the other options that we have available to us right now, and that's like Brave browser. And as far as I'm aware, if you right click on images in Brave, it actually does give you the option to search with Google. So it doesn't do Google Lens, I don't think. Don't quote me on that, but it does search into it, like adds it as a search item into Google, I believe. So,
Mm,
I mean, I don't know. This is obviously not great because like sending more stuff to Google, no thanks. But obviously this probably is another thing about like money is changing hands for this to be implemented. So I guess that's to try and help them with their funding and to avoid like the possibility that they don't get any more money from search deals, because I know there was quite a bit of concern about Google basically having a monopoly and forcing every browser to basically make it the default search engine, which kind of further established them as like the top search engine. So it's kind of concerning when it's like that sort of thing. But I think that it's interesting that Mozilla is adding this at the same time as like AI slop search engine. And I think also with the profiles thing, I think it's still like it's copying Chrome. It's not doing anything new, and I think I'd rather have seen it like work in a similar way as it does in like Arc browser, where you can easily switch. Because personally, I've found that the profile like option on Brave and like Chrome isn't particularly great. So it's sort of tricky, right? I
mm,
think that this is like overall a pretty negative update to Firefox, and I think they've sort of been going in this direction of adding stuff that people don't really want for quite a while now, and we're seeing like stuff like Zen browser and like LibreWolf and Molvad and Tor browser. Like people are choosing to use these over Firefox for quite a while now. So it's kind of frustrating that uh Firefox is sort of in a weird position where like they need money, so they're making all these like terrible integrations that absolutely nobody wants, but also they are like they need to be actually making stuff that people want if they want to see people actually continuing to use the browser, because as far as I'm aware, like usage of Firefox is dropping. More people are switching to like Brave, Edge, Opera, uh, Arc, all these different other browsers, or like you said, Perplexity has their own thing now, which is awful. But you know, it's like any of these AI browser things that are coming out. I think that's really the only like I think it's interesting to see companies sort of pivoting to a different type of way of developing a browser, because I think that is really the point where Google Chrome could be dethroned. Like if Perplexity's browser actually stays on and becomes sort of like the replacement to Chrome, because it has been for so long. Chrome was on top, almost artificially, I think, because they have ads everywhere for their browser. They, you know, they're they're they have the best search engine in the world, or the most popular at least. Maybe
mm.
not the best, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like with Google. Yes, they have reached dominance in this market, and Firefox have went downhill for the past few decades. Um, I don't know if I like it if there's increased competition from AI search engines. It's it feels unnatural to me. It feels, if you think about it, like sad to see AI seeping in through everything we do, and now just simple like browser. Like, do we really need more integration with AI? to our own browsers? I don't think so. I don't know. It's like companies are desperately trying to figure out a way to monetize it. And with the addition of, let's say, a browser, for example, um, it could be an amazing way to collect more data from folks. Because with the current approach, it's based off the searches you make or directly visiting the LLM in question on their website. But with the browser, it just adds more avenues for data collection to occur, and it's almost impossible to do so privately. Um, so I do not want that to be the norm. And if for some god awful reason Firefox is like the only browser that you know doesn't implement a full on AI integration, then we may have to go back to it. But it seems to me like right now, a lot of Google's recent antitrust cases against Chrome itself and its ownership and management of Chrome compared to all of these, competing like startups, it's very clear that a breakup of Chrome may not necessarily benefit alternatives like Firefox, but it may benefit these AI-based startups and may, in the long run, hurt our privacy. Which I never thought I'd ever say. Like wanting Google Chrome to like remain. I don't know. It feels weird to me, but hey, that's how the world works nowadays. With the whole AI slop that's going on.
Yeah, it's sort of frustrating that the only companies that are really able to actually take on Google Chrome are like basically these bankrolled like AI companies that are just getting absolutely, money is being funneled. Like I think we were talking earlier before the stream that like the US economy is basically being held up by AI, data centers being built and like the AI industry. It's going to be interesting to see like how that plays out, because I think there's like a lot riding on this AI stuff, and it's going to be interesting because like I don't know if you've read, but the enshittification might happen, and I think we'll see this be like with AI, it'll be like this sort of thing where it's right now it's like sort of an unlimited, freely accessible thing, but I think eventually this is going to start racking up costs, because I know that like these AI tools they need a lot of GPU and like CPU power to actually keep them running and run these huge models to be able to process and perform like operations. And I think that is costing these companies a lot of money, but it's not really an issue at this point because they're just being bankrolled so hard. So I think once we see that sort of thing catching up with them, I think we'll see that a lot more of these sort of AI things becomes more of like a thing that people are now addicted to and like they need for everything basically. And that'll be sort of when they start charging people more money for it, because right now it's like sort of a free thing that basically anyone can access, but there is like a premium aspect to it. But I feel like not many people actually buy those premium subscriptions, but I might be wrong on that. But it'll definitely be interesting to see when the AI bubble like sort of pops and this whole like AI crazy trend finally ends, because we see this quite often with like a lot of trends. Like I remember a couple of years ago it was like NFTs and Web3, and now that's like sort of doesn't exist anymore. But now we're like sort of in the AI phase, and that'll be another thing to see what happens with that. And I think unfortunately, it seems like AI is a little bit more, it's definitely here to stay at least a little bit longer than like the NFTs and Web3 stuff.
If I do make a prediction, I believe a lot of these fancy features you see, like AI replacing entire teams. That I don't think that will happen in the long term once companies realizing that it was actually costing them money. But right now, of course, it is happening, and I believe it's going to start making a mistake and screwing over the entire economy. But what will happen though is that a lot of folks will use it for the very personal aspects of things. Like people will use it to have a companion to talk to. It's already been documented that like a lot of folks are already uh, you know unfortunately ending their own lives because of AI. Um, you know, falling in love with AI companion, for example. Um, I believe that will be the long term effect of AI on our society, and the rise of deepfakes, and AI voices, for example, imitating like folks who are alive and dead. Um, I think, unfortunately, the legacy of AI is not what we think it will be. It's not necessarily always be good. At the end of the day, I feel like we don't really talk about those enough. And it's sad to see so many companies try to embrace it in order to try to obtain some form of profit, when at the end of the day, it's just a marketing blurb. And we all know how marketing blurbs are. They're not always true. Um, but yeah, I think, Jordan,
Definitely.
it's great. We can actually move on to our next article
Yes.
about this new hack, right?
Yes. So basically, there was a malicious app that basically was able to steal 2FA codes. So here's the article from Ars Technica. Hackers can steal 2FA codes and private messages from Android phones. Malicious app required to make pic snapping attack works. Requires no permissions. So Android devices are vulnerable to a new attack that can covertly steal two-factor authentication codes, location timelines, and other private data in less than 30 seconds. Basically, the new attack is called pic snapping, and it was found by a team of academic researchers who devised it. And basically, it requires a victim to install a malicious app on an Android phone or tablet. The app, which requires no system permissions, can then effectively read data that any other installed app displays on the screen. Pic snapping has been demonstrated on the Google Pixel phones and the Samsung Galaxy S25, and likely could be modified to work on other models with additional work. Google released mitigations last month, but the researchers said a modified version of the attack works even when the update is installed. So, sort of explaining how this attack works. Basically, it works, hold on, let me just make this a little bit bigger. It works like taking a screenshot. Pic snapping attacks begin with the malicious app invoking Android programming interfaces that cause the authenticator or other targeted apps to send sensitive information to the device screen. The malicious app then runs graphical operations on individual pixels of interest to the attacker. Pic snapping then exploits a side channel to allow the malicious app to map the pixels at those coordinates to letters, numbers, or shapes. Basically, anything that is visible when the target app is opened can be stolen by the malicious app using pic snapping. So basically, they made an informational site, which I guess I can open on screen for everyone to take a look at. So this is like the demo video, I guess. So sorry for audio listeners, but I'm going to just show this while we're talking about it. But basically, I think a lot of people were concerned about this sort of attack, but as far as I'm aware, this is only applicable, like, it doesn't actually show the secret key on your 2FA app. It only shows like the codes that are being displayed to you, right? So stuff that's like displayed on the screen is where it's being exploited. So this doesn't technically apply to like the secret keys and stuff like that. So I think if you opened the secret key on your screen, then I guess they could probably steal it. But yeah, this is sort of an interesting attack nonetheless.
Yeah, I believe it relies entirely off the GPU of your phone in question. So just to like actually explain, I think one of the commenters on the original article on our Stentica website itself actually explains it perfectly. So essentially, like what this user described, stated that it's a side channel attack, where the attackers will render something transparent, and then there's an additional timing attack as well, where they'll use the GPU's graphical data to essentially try to find the color of the pixel and then map them there. Hence the term pic snapping. It's essentially taking the pixels, or rather the individual pixels of, let's say, hypothetical 2FA codes or your messages, and then reconstructing it together. So it's a very creative attack. There's no evidence of it being exploited in the wild yet, according to the research team. But what I did know, however, is that there is no confirmation on whether or not it actually works on devices outside of the Pixel family and the S25. But most likely, though, it could be easily exploited. Hence why there's a lot of challenges on actually trying to fix it. Google did release a fix originally, like a few months back, when it was initially disclosed, but the research team was able to easily find a workaround for that. And this specific patch to fix that workaround won't be released until the next security bulletin for Android, which is, I believe, November. So right now, your phones are still vulnerable to this hypothetical attack. I really want to talk about something called passkeys, which completely ignores uh, this attack at all. Um, as you may know, this attack only affects text you may see on the screen. But with the passkey, which requires usually interaction from a device or a YubiKey, for example, which is like a USB device, you can safely authenticate your accounts without having to deal with potential side channel attacks. Um, so I definitely do believe that the trend of adopting passkeys could potentially fix this once and for all. But for now, though, a lot of people still use 2FA codes to log into their accounts, and we can't really ignore that. And not everyone has the time to have a physical key, or try to set like a password manager or a dedicated device to unlock everything. And I believe passkeys, as much as how this trying to be the new standard right now, is going to be slow to adopt that in the near future. There's already a challenge trying to get people to switch over to 2FA in the first place. So definitely do consider switching to passkeys as your two-factor authentication method, instead of just using these like one-time passwords that will pop up on the screen and could potentially be exploited by these type of side channel attacks.
One thing I do think that is kind of interesting about this is I wonder how actually affected this would be on like a Google Pixel running GrapheneOS, because I think they have extra like protections that aren't actually available on like the standard Google stock operating system. So I think it'd be interesting to see if this would be possible, specifically because I think there's like restrictions to like the way that a lot of apps can basically have memory tagging enabled by default, and like whether that would affect the way that you can exploit the GPU, I'm not sure, but it would be quite interesting to see if someone did test that. That would be quite interesting. But I think, yeah, this is, like you said, passkeys are a really important thing. And I think also just, if you have the budget, or if you have a concern that you might be targeted by something like this, or if you just want to level up your security, I think, hardware security keys are definitely a worthwhile investment, such as like a YubiKey or like an only key or a nitro key. Those sort of things are going to protect you against this sort of attack, because yeah, there's no code to steal. It's stored within the secure enclave of the device, so there's no way for a third party to basically exfiltrate the information. But I think also one thing to consider is using, when you're in the TOTP app, I would set these settings to only display codes that you tap. That would also reduce the leakage possibly, and also it would stop onlookers who might be watching you when you're entering a code from stealing other codes. So I think that's probably a good thing to consider enabling in your TOTP app. But unfortunately, I believe Google's two-factor authentication app doesn't enable that by default, but I think pretty much every other app does. So you're probably good on that front, especially if you're using something like NTAuth or Aegis. So it's worth checking that and making sure that you can be protected against it.
Yeah. Do you know if Proton Authenticator supports that feature? Because I maybe I misremembered, but I vaguely remember something on the forum where it's not supported. But then again, maybe I like misremembered as like Google itself or something.
Yeah, so I think so. Yeah, I think it does. I think it does that by default actually, but I might be
Oh
wrong. I
wow.
can't check right now because my phone's doing this thingy, but I think it's worth checking to make sure that, I think it would have that ability to enable that. So definitely check to see if you can enable that setting, because yeah, that would protect a little bit from this attack. But also, I think it goes without saying, just be careful what apps you're installing in the first place. Don't install stuff that looks kind of sus, because this is what sort of apps we know now that this can be done, right? So install stuff that's like genuine. Don't install cracked apps. Don't install stuff that's like from a third-party website. Install it from the official developer if you can. Yeah, just use common
Yeah,
sense basically.
Yeah, please. And that goes for side loading or not side loading. Google will probably use this as an example to not side load apps, period, where you have to be forced to use the Google Play Store. Guess what? These apps can also exist on the Google Play Store. So you can't just drop your common sense if you're like saying, you know what? I'm not downloading any apps. Will not turn off the option to avoid downloading from internal sources, external sources. Sorry. I'll only download from Google Play Store. Guess what? I've read countless news articles where the Google Play Store has hosted numerous hundreds of like spyware just like on the device itself. It's not necessarily like a solution to only install apps from the Google Play Store. So I highly advise folks to have that common sense no matter where you're installing it from, even if you're installing from the official developer itself. Still, don't be afraid of permissions and looking through them, because obviously the biggest like symptom of an app being malicious is if it has unnecessary permissions. And you don't want an app to know your location all the time. So if it's just a calculator app, for example, don't avoid that. Just because like this hypothetical attack does exist where it doesn't require permissions doesn't mean you shouldn't be diligent of installing apps and checking your permissions. We're not saying that you shouldn't do that. We're just saying to have common sense and potentially consider using a passkey.
Definitely good advice all around. I think we've sort of talked about this stuff for a while now, and we've sort of covered all the articles that we were hoping to cover this week. So I think it's probably time that we move into some of the Q&A section of this stream. So I think it's important that we start with some of our members first. So we had some questions from our members, so let's try and hit those first on the forum thread.
Of course. I believe Jonah did a little moderation work on our forum thread. A lot of folks are having discussions which are supposed to be questions on the live stream. So I really emphasize folks that if you're on the forum thread itself, please keep all replies as questions if possible. And if you do want to have a discussion on things, please consider creating your own separate topic. Anyways, this member question comes from, I need to click on this user. Wait 1 second. How private is Windows 11 Enterprise compared to Linux or Mac OS? By Nico TIU. How private is Windows 11 Enterprise with a local account and telemetry disabled compared to Mac OS or other Linux distributions? If you do a dual boot with Windows plus Fedora and install them on different hard drives, both encrypted, does Windows have any kind of access to the drive where Fedora is installed? Thanks a lot. Do you want to tackle this question, Jordan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it certainly is an interesting question to ask, especially because I think there's a lot of people who are like considering, do I upgrade to Windows 11? Do I switch to Linux? Do I buy a Mac? Like a lot of people are having questions about that right now because Windows, I believe, like a couple of days ago, Windows 10 just ended support officially. They still have a couple of extra like years worth of updates though for like security patches that have been rolling out, because I think a lot of people are just like not upgrading, which rightfully so, I think. But when it comes to Windows 11 Enterprise, you do get extra options on like the things that you can disable, the data that you can stop from being sent to Microsoft. So with like a standard Windows 11 Pro installation, you get the option to restrict it to a minimal amount, but on Windows 11 Enterprise, you get the option to stop it entirely, the diagnostic data entirely. So that's like a benefit of using the Enterprise version. You'll also need a Windows 11 Enterprise key, which I'll leave that up to you. And I think it's also going to be a little bit better to go with Enterprise over like the Pro or the Home version, because you're going to get less bloatware installed, which I don't know if you've noticed, but Windows 11 Pro, Windows 11 Home especially, is like absolutely chock full of garbage that nobody wants, like Candy Crush
Can
Saga.
confirm.
Like
100%. It's horrible. I had to start with Windows 11 Home, which came default with my laptop. Horrible amount of bloatware. Ended up switching to a professional later through an upgrade key, and it significantly reduced like the amount of bloatware installed. But with Enterprise, I'm sure you remove a lot of the Microsoft native apps that are available, such as Edge, for example. Well, actually, I'm not sure about that, but
no,
A lot. No, you can't. Okay, sad, sad. But you can definitely neuter it though. On that note, though, we do have a lot of information on how to secure your enterprise edition of Windows. We have a lot our official recommendations in our knowledge base written by Jonah, and we also have a community wiki where a lot of our community members came together to create their own version of potential group policies they may modify. So if you're still interested in trying to like keep Windows on enterprise for now, um, by all means consider doing it. You'll still reduce a lot of the telemetry involved. Whether or not that you want to like abandon it or not, it's completely up to you. I think our main advice is use Windows if you need it for work or professional um, purposes, or potentially even online gaming. But if you could not use Windows, don't. You don't want to support Microsoft at all. They're frankly like the worst player in terms of horrible privacy practices, I'd say. To answer your second question on dual booting, um, nominally, no, Windows will not, for example, track your activity on Fedora and suddenly give you targeted ads, for example. That's not the case. If it's on separate partitions and assuming that everything is encrypted, you should be fine. It is a different issue, however, regarding malware, all right? Because assuming that you did not encrypt anything with BitLocker or Lux on Linux, for example, and your Windows partition got infected with malware, um, that malware could potentially have access to your entire system through the aforementioned bootkits that was mentioned in the second article about framework laptops. So maybe you shouldn't probably think of it as like whether or not Windows can access my Linux partition. You should think of it more as kind of malware affect one of my partitions and read the other partition. And the second problem is a lot more likely than the first problem, I would say. So definitely do consider having secure boot enabled. I completely forgot whether secure boot could be enabled on dual boot systems. I believe with Fedora it is possible. I still need to take a look at it, but please do keep in mind that if you use like a custom kernel, that's not the default kernel within like your Linux distributions. It means you will not able to support secure boot. So keep that in mind before proceeding with Fedora. If you decide to change the kernel for some whatever reason, such as to support like your device better. But besides that, though, normally secure boot is supported, and you should be okay, and you shouldn't have anything to worry about as long as you enable encryption and secure boot.
Yep, good points all around. I think I believe that Fedora just like automatically has the Windows like secure boot keys, so like you won't have to disable it or anything. You can just install it alongside it, and you shouldn't have to change any settings. Just boot straight off the USB. So that's definitely a good option, I think. But also, I guess coming back to your question with like a local account telemetry disabled, compared to macOS or other Linux distributions, I think you're still gonna see like a pretty significant reduction in like telemetry and like extra data being collected. And especially because Windows does share some of that data with like, for like advertising purposes, depending on which version you're using. Windows 11 Enterprise is a lot more locked down. And I think in a lot of cases, Microsoft is sort of like heavily incentivized not to do that on the enterprise version because, it's going to actually be used for enterprise use cases where data privacy like restrictions are a lot more strict. And if it was found that they were looking at, they were selling your data for specific purposes like that, that would be kind of concerning, and they would probably get fined a bunch of money. So they're probably not going to be doing that, especially if you disable all the telemetry. But obviously, when you're running Windows, it's a closed source operating system. It is, at the end of the day, not the best option, but I think if you need Windows for like gaming, or if you need it for like specific applications, then I think it's worth at least keeping it around in case you need a dual boot. But I would try and separate your activity more into like Linux, and then specifically if you do like gaming and stuff, you should just keep that specifically on Windows, and basically every other task you can just do that on Linux. And that's going to significantly reduce the amount of data that you're sharing with Microsoft. But also another thing to remember is a lot of times I've seen people getting their Linux installations basically bricked because they've had both operating systems on the same storage device. So I would highly recommend just separating them. So have one hard drive or SSD for Windows, one hard drive or SSD for Linux, because it is possible that Microsoft can basically see the grub bootloader and think that it's basically broken the Windows bootloader, and it can basically override it. So that can basically brick your Linux installation, and then you'll have to re-add it, which can be a bit of a pain. And I know some people may not be technical enough to recover from that sort of thing. So it's definitely important to consider that as well.
Potential solutions also include switching to macOS or Linux fully. I chose Linux. As someone who used Windows quite a lot, like a few years ago, it's not that bad to switch over completely. I'm completely understand if you need Windows for specific use cases, but Linux is honestly like an amazing thing to use on your computer, and if your device does support it. So if you do need any advice on switching to Linux, dual booting, or figuring out how to harden your Windows installation, we have a lot of resources on our forum and in our knowledge base if you need it. Um, that being said, let's move on to the next question by Hack or Swim. They ask, my question is, how do you interpret the current delay in releasing Android 16 QPR1 to AOSP? And if this becomes a new normal, how does this impact projects like GrapheneOS? I briefly touched upon this earlier, but just to restate, hopefully this won't be a pattern because it appears to be a result of mismanagement and disorganization by Google and a bunch of other tech companies as well. But if it does become the new normal, GrapheneOS may have to rely fully on their new OEM. And this kind of hints on the next question in this thread. But if this new OEM isn't as secure as Pixel devices on paper, it means that GrapheneOS may be slightly less secure. It could actually improve in the future, but it won't be as bleeding edge, I'd say, compared to the original Pixel devices with GrapheneOS installed. Graphene will survive. I think they've done an amazing job of ensuring survivability for the project for the long term. They have a lot of high-scale donors, such as the founder of Ethereum, I believe, Vitalik, I believe. I can't pronounce his name, but they have a lot of support financially and organizationally, and they have the ability to even contacting OEMs by themselves. So I wouldn't worry too much about survivability. What you should probably worry about more is potential loss of features that might happen from this initial switch. But it could potentially improve, though. We do see a trend of MDE being adopted widely. It started with, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it started being adopted with the Pixel 8 series, and then it spread over to the recent iPhone 17 series, and now potentially with the Snapdragon Elite Gen 5. Those chips can finally support MTE as well. All that means that the vast majority of devices in the future are more memory safe compared to older devices and are more resistant towards targeted spyware attacks. So I think there's a general trend of security over the next few years out there, which is good. So ironically, there's a really good argument in which if you really want security and don't give any cares about privacy, having a stock device is a lot safer. Sometimes, compared to having an outdated device with graphene in it. But of course, graphene will survive, so that won't be the situation that will happen. And you shouldn't have to worry about it because they have a lot of backup plans in place. And just because a new OEM will have slightly less security doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad phone or you shouldn't buy it. It'll still work perfectly for the vast majority of people, and it might be the best solution for Google for graphene if Google does end up pulling a plug on open source.
Yeah, I mean, that's the worst case scenario, right? Google completely drops open sourcing their operating system, Android But I think like, yeah, we're probably just gonna see them like, pulling back a lot of the Pixel device trees like they already have. I don't think they will actually like make Android closed source. That's pretty unlikely, I think. But just because like, uh, we've seen how important this like open source thing is, right? Like with Chromium, like Chromium is basically powering the entire web almost. Well, unless you include like Firefox and like Safari, I guess. But the majority of people are using Chromium based browsers, and I think, all that development being concentrated on Chromium is definitely helping security, helping like their market share to continue. Because, yeah, it is basically impossible at this point to build another browser engine from scratch without like a ridiculous amount of funding. So I think we're seeing like a similar issue with Android and iOS. Basically, they've reached such a point with like so much, so the user base is so high, the switching cost of like having another operating system come out that isn't going to support all the same stuff as the other operating systems is basically it's basically meant that there's only two options. You're going to go iOS or you're going to go Android. I know there's Linux phones, but they're just not quite there. They're just not really ready.
Yeah. I heard like the most flagship Linux phone out there, you can be installed in either like an older OnePlus or the Fairphone 5. So there's still like a long way to go in terms of like modern support. I think there's the Jala phone as well with Sailfish OS.
Yeah.
I don't know. Once again, we don't really know like the status of Linux phones yet. It's very hit and miss, and right now it definitely could be considered like a very hobbyist project with potential to expand in the future. So I don't discount Linux phones entirely. It's just the matter of, do you accept the desktop security model in your mobile phone? No, use Android or Apple. If you don't mind it, if you believe that you're not going to be the target of malware or forensics, yeah, Linux phones are perfect, honestly, like for use cases for reducing telemetry. But just go back on topic to GrapheneOS though. I actually have a question for you, Jordan. Personally, like, do you feel as if like the GrapheneOS will survive long term as a project with this new OEM though? Like, do you think that assuming they transition entirely from Google to this new OEM, do you think like this partnership will be better? Will it be more communicative compared to Google? Do you feel like will they try to release their own new phone, or will they try to expand to other OEMs, or do you think like once again we'll kind of have a new situation where Google is being replaced by this OEM, and one day this OEM will screw them over?
Yeah, that's certainly a good question, right? I don't think they really have any incentive to drop support for Pixels. I think as long as they're actually still supported by Google, which it doesn't seem like they're gonna completely drop support because, like, the Google Pixels still allow you to unlock the bootloader. They still allow you to, use a separate secure boot key. So I think that's probably not that likely, but I think there's like we've seen with the Pixel 10, it's been out for like probably a couple of months at this point. I feel like maybe a month. I don't know. Time flies. But basically we've seen like with the Pixel 10, there's like quite a lot of extra development time that's required to get that ready. And as far as I'm aware, it's like not really at a point where it's like daily drivable yet. So I think it'd be good to see them just support both for as long as possible, because yeah, we don't really know. Honestly, like I think it's a little bit, I'm not getting my hopes up for this because, like we said, there was a case where they were working with an OEM in the past and it didn't work out. And I think the GrapheneOS people have very strong opinions on security and a lot of things like that. And I think that could make the relationship with an OEM a little bit more tricky, especially when they have such strong opinions on security. And I think that Google has long been at the forefront of that. So it might be hard for like, a smaller OEM to basically come in and be able to offer the same level of security as Google, because yeah, they have kind of been at the forefront of this for basically forever. Like MTE was it's not a new thing, but the Google Pixels were the first, I believe, to implement that on a mobile device because of v9 like support was released for that. So yeah, they're basically kind of been at the forefront when it comes to like implementing hardware security features, like, you know, with the Titan M. I feel like they were probably one of the first companies to offer that secure enclave. And I think that was from the Pixel 2, I believe. Or no,
Mm,
the Pixel 3, I think. But the other ones had the Titan M1, which was like a similar thing, but not as secure.
mm,
Um,
mm.
so it's certainly interesting, but I think, yeah, if it doesn't work out, I think there's still Google Pixels. All the devices that are currently supported could still continue running. So I think, you know, those devices have still got like, I think the Pixel 9 has got like another 6 years of updates. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Yeah, no need to worry. It appears that this like quarterly update only affects the porting process to the Pixel 10. But we did mention this before, but Pixel 10 will be supported. We just don't know when. Um, there's still up in question whether or not like Pixel 11 and above will be supported ever with this new OEM in question. But your current devices will be supported until end of life. And I think this is an excellent segue actually to Anonymous451, who writes, the GrapheneOS team admits that the initial generation may have some security disadvantages compared to Pixels. And an example to give is a less hard to secure element. There are likely other security disadvantages since they provide that only as an example. With this in mind, will you guys be buying the new phone personally speaking? I personally will, despite the disadvantages, as will allow GrapheneOS to signal to the manufacturer that they're worth the risk. Later generations will hopefully be as secure or more, but although I'm buying to support a team, I'll likely not daily drive the phone over my current Pixel due to security disadvantage. I'll likely give to a friend as a gift with GrapheneOS installed. Another question for those more technically knowledgeable, compared to current Pixel phones, how will a less hardened security element look like? What does that entail for those who don't know much about technology? Um, I guess we can start with like when are we buying the new phone? For me personally, I am in need of a device. Mine's only has 4 GB of RAM. It's an iPhone, and I'm in desperate need of an update. The recent iOS update has screwed over any sort of performance like gains I would have had by not updating, and I heavily regret it, despite the security patches. So I'm definitely considering, ironically, to buy the Pixel 9a, trade it in, and use that for a year or so, and then see how this new OEM, how would they like market their phone, and how would they actually like announce this whole like collaboration. Um, I think something I am definitely a little concerned about is what if like this phone is not available in the United States, because there's a huge like instance of carrier locking where there's only a few phones available in the US, and it's very hard to like import phones. You gotta pay taxes, and there's a chance that your carrier may not even support it. I heard T-Mobile is pretty good in terms of supporting like imported phones, but other carriers are not so friendly towards that. That's why right now we only have a few options like besides like Apple and Google, right? There's Samsung, Motorola, and OnePlus. That's really it, which is sad. We don't really have a lot of options out there. Nothing does have a beta program, but they confirmed that your experience with your carriers is not guaranteed. Um, and I heard like a bunch of like Chinese made phones have varying degrees of success as well. So yeah, we don't really have a lot of options, unfortunately. Um, so whether or not like I will buy it, I'd say I will buy it if I could buy it in the store and have it supported by a carrier. Otherwise, I might just stick to the Pixel 9a in the near future.
Yeah, I've always thought it was like kind of strange because I've always noticed that like a lot of times there'll be like a phone and then there'll be like the USA version because it needs to support like specific bands that are only used in the US by specific carriers, and there's like a whole thing about that. That's like really kind of, I don't know, that seems very US centric. As far as I know, that's like not really a concern in like Australia or like Europe. Phones just sort of work. I mean, we use the same bands, like all the carriers just use similar bands, so it's very strange that that's sort of, I don't know, very much like a US carrier thing. I think it'd be interesting though, like if it is a Chinese phone, I'm gonna assume that it's not gonna be available in the US because I don't know, like it seems like the US government doesn't like that. Like I've seen like Huawei is not allowed to be sold in the US and like other Chinese models.
Yeah, I think it's Huawei and ZTE. And I believe what they did to circumvent like the ban is that they had spin-off brands. So Huawei had a budget lineup called Honor, and what they did to circumvent the ban is they ended up making Honor its own company and separate it fully from Huawei, meaning that technically you can still import Huawei phones and have it work somewhat fine on T-Mobile potentially. That's like kind of like the gist of things. So same thing with ZTE, I believe. Um, and there has been a bill that, not a bill, but a call for investigation on OnePlus phones because, of the whole Oppo consortium. Um, so yeah, it's like, it's a bit risky, but I personally don't think there's a lot of like political manpower to like ban all Chinese made phones. Because if you think about it, almost everything is Chinese made in some way, shape, or form. The difference is like what happens on the OS level, right? If you look at Motorola, it's owned by Lenovo. Are we banning Lenovo ThinkPads and Lenovo phones as well? Well, Motorola phones. It doesn't make sense, but we don't know what will happen in Washington. So it's like a bit of a concern, but I'd say for now though, like there hasn't been an increase to ban like, potential phones besides Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting to see what like the US government does because I feel like there has been more of a push to like have more US manufacturing, but like when it comes to like these phones, like the microprocessor like development is like extremely specialized. I feel like it would be kind of unlikely for that to happen in the US at any time. And yeah, it's sort of unfortunate that like the majority of basically hardware development is in China, right? But I think yeah, there's it's interesting to see how like there is a sort of ban on those devices, like you said. But I personally, it's like for anyone outside of like China and the US, it's like a decision of like which government do I want to spy on me, basically at that point. Um, which is like not a great option, I guess. But yeah, I don't really have a preference personally.
Mm. Will you be buying the phone or no? Do you think to stick with your current phone for the next like year and a half?
I just recently upgraded, so it's probably not likely. I was sticking with like, I don't know, I kind of went through a couple of phones for a while, just like had issues with them. I had a Pixel 6a for a bit, and I just kept having battery problems, which foreshadowing, yeah, it probably would have exploded at some point. So luckily I sold
Oh
it.
God.
Um, which was interesting because I kept complaining about it getting really hot and it kept running out of battery really fast. And I was like, surely there must be like a fault with this phone, right? And yeah, I was just getting tired of it. So I sold it and I bought an iPhone SE,
Ooh.
which was like really cheap, a secondhand one,
Mm.
which was fine. But I started having issues with that as well because it was secondhand. Like the touchscreen, I was having issues with it. So it's yeah. So I upgraded to an iPhone 16. So it's yeah. I don't think I'll be buying a GrapheneOS phone. I don't. I usually am like the sort of person that sticks with a phone for a very long time. Like I had a Pixel 2 XL that I bought in 2017, and that was what I was using up until like last year, I think, and I was running like DevestOS on it. Which doesn't exist anymore, which yeah, that sucks.
Oh, RIP.
But yeah, so I usually am sort of the person that sticks with a phone for a very long time after I buy something decent. Um, so yeah, I'm probably not going to buy this just because I don't really have any reason to own one. Um, and yeah, I do have like a test device that I have, which is like a Pixel 9, but I don't use that like personally really very much. I just use it for like testing stuff because yeah, I usually have to check to see if apps work and stuff like that. But
Mm.
I don't think I would upgrade that to like a GrapheneOS phone either. But I mean, it depends on like the cost of it, I guess, and what it looks like. But
Mm.
I think someone at Privacy Guides will definitely have to get one just to test it. Because yeah, that'll probably be something that gets added to the website at some point if it ends up panning out. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, potential review for the next year. We have to add that to the backlog of things to write about. And as for their next question, they want to ask about how will a less hard and secure element will look like, and how would you describe this to someone who doesn't really know about tech? Yeah, good question. There isn't really a lot of information what GrapheneOS said about a less hard secure element. I'm assuming that apparently like this certain chip is a lot more vulnerable to like attacks, like to memory based attacks, for example, potentially. We don't really know without the details, so I don't think we can probably answer that. But what we can definitely do say, however, is like a secure element essentially is a separate chip on your phone, for example. And this chip has its own separate operating system from the rest of your phone. And this dedicated element and this chip deals, it's the one that holds like a lot of your passwords, for example, or a lot of the encryption keys to use to decrypt your phone, for example, or it's where like the phone keychain is held, I believe. And this specific keychain is used to like unlock a lot of things on your phone. But do you have another explanation for this, Jordan? Because I'm not sure mine's like simple enough.
Yeah, no, I think you explained it really well. I think, yeah, it's sort of like a cryptographic, like, I don't know. I like the idea of like secure enclave. Basically, it's like a place where like secure information is stored and it can't be exfiltrated. I think that's probably like the most simple explanation. But yeah, I honestly, I think that's sort of a minor concern, I would say. But obviously, we can't really make any judgments about what it's actually going to look like. I'm assuming when they say less secure, less hardened secure element, one of the things that the secure element does is it actually protects the device from being brute forced. So it's possible that this less hardened secure element could be more vulnerable to brute forcing attacks, which, again, that's not really a concern for like the normal person, I guess. But if law enforcement stole your device or whatever, I think as soon as you get like physical access to a device, you're basically done. Because there's all sorts of like vulnerabilities that can be exploited, not just now, but in the future as well. So yeah, it's kind of tricky, but I think that would definitely be something to consider if that's in your threat model and you're concerned about your device being brute forced. I would definitely stick with the Pixel for now, and I would see what we find with this new device, because there was a comment in the YouTube chat from, hold on, Dutch Bass Addict. So basically they asked, is there like a timeline? I think the GrapheneOS team said that it was going to be coming in 2026 or 2027. So definitely not anytime this year. So I would definitely just hold your horses. I think with the Pixel 8 Pro, you're still getting the memory tagging enforcement. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I would probably stick with what you have now, and especially with like the build quality of Pixel devices, I think you'll find that the phone will hold up really well and it won't really have any issues for the near future, at least.
Yeah. Maybe about the battery itself, we can't really confirm whether or not it will not blow up. Maybe don't sleep with it under your pillow or something. Like if you've seen a video on by J Rigs everything, it's scary. Like that 10 Pro Fold, that poor thing like exploded, and then I think like he ended up like inhaling like a bunch of like toxic fumes and ended up being nonchalant about it like throughout the entire video. It was insane though. I did not expect like the Pixel 10 Pro Fold to be in the same lineup as like the Note 7 back in the day. So that was like kind of the reference we are making earlier.
I think also just to clarify, like he was like just trying to bend it into like absolutely like strange ways. So I think, yeah, don't do that with your Pixel 10 Pro
Yeah.
Fold. But I think generally like there is a decent track record, at least for the non-A models of Pixels, to not explode. So I would honestly just avoid the A models. It seems to always be the A models. I don't know why. Pixel 6a, Pixel 7a, both had issues. Pixel 8a actually still has issues. So not related to the battery though. I think it's related to other things. But it's really unfortunate that we keep seeing these issues, like hardware issues. That would be really annoying to deal with, especially because, yeah, it's not exactly like, what are you going to do if it explodes? Basically, I don't know, you've lost a phone, I guess. I don't think Google would be,
Yeah.
if it's out of warranty, they probably wouldn't give you a new one.
Yeah, I guess like one of the main reasons why we really like would like the pixels not to be supported and then not supported, but like have an alternative to pixels would be the fact that it's horrible track record on battery. I know that the tensor isn't the most efficient SoC possible. Like Google has been trying to cut corners for the past like few years. They're trying to make it like around $65 to manufacture one like tensor chip on a Pixel phone, when normally like the budget for CPUs, not CPUs, but SoCs are a lot higher, like $135, $200, as you see with Qualcomm Snapdragon or Apple's A19, for example. Um, so it's clear that by cutting corners in critical components like the SoC and the battery itself, it's very telling of what Google prioritizes in their phone. And do we really want an AI first phone, which is admittedly very secure and very well supported with updates? Um, do we really want that to like be the only thing we rely on? I don't think so. I think the sooner we have like a Snapdragon based phone, the more we can finally like embrace power efficiency like on our like devices. I'd say like for those who are switching to graphene potentially, because I feel like if you ever switch to a Pixel device, you definitely do sacrifice battery life a lot. And it's unfortunate. And while using graphene can definitely fix a lot of those battery life issues by removing a lot of the Google services, um, it's not, you can't really change the hardware. It's like you have a 6A, it's slow, it burns battery quick, it gets really warm. You can't really fix that. So yeah, I can't really do much about it.
Yeah, I think like the main issue that I've had with like Pixel devices is basically any mobile gaming is basically impossible. Like if you play basically any, even like moderately intense games on your mobile phone, even just like the latest Pixel 10 Pro, it absolutely chugs on like even just like stuff that runs flawlessly on iPhones and on Samsung devices. So it is kind of a problem, especially if you like care about performance. It does chug a little bit more than like what you would expect. And yeah, it is kind of frustrating that like Google keeps putting some like mid-range chip in their phone, because it's not a cheap device. It's very expensive. Like especially like these new couple of generations, I believe like the 8, 9, and 10 generations, the price has really kind of, gone up. It's like it's quite an expensive phone at this point, and offering performance of like a mid-range phone in like a very premium device is kind of frustrating, which is basically uh which is sort of uh a constant complaint that I see when it comes to Google Pixel devices. Just the performance is pretty rubbish. And I mean, I don't think it affects like normal usage, but you can definitely tell when you've been using like an iPhone or a Samsung device. You can tell it's very snappy and fast, and then you switch to a Pixel and you're like noticing the UI lagging or like stuff like that. It's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and that isn't the whole point of a Pixel is you have a good camera and the software experience is amazing, right? But what's the point when there's like a noticeable like decline in user experience when you're just using your phone for day-to-day tasks like swiping, like click on an app, for example. It doesn't make sense. Even like for the camera, like other like phones are actually getting there, so like it's not particularly special anymore. Even it's still like really good. Like Samsung cameras are finally improved quite a lot. The iPhone is the iPhone. It's always really good camera, especially for social media. Um, I heard like a lot of the Chinese made phones like have amazing cameras, like the Vivo X300 Pro, I believe. But you know, it's hard to get in the West, unfortunately. But yeah, like I'm saying though, like a lot of the unique value propositions of Google nowadays is being AI first. And I'm sorry, like I think out of principle, I just don't want to support an AI first like phone, even if it's really, really secure. As I said before.
I don't know, like, yeah, I do have like that Pixel device that I have tested out a lot of these features to see like, is this done locally? Is this actually sent to Google? And yeah, in a lot of cases, unfortunately, these features are like not actually based on like, secure on-device processing. They're just being sent to Google's cloud for them to collect and to use for improving their AI systems. So like, Gemini Live, which is basically a system where you can like talk directly to Gemini, sends it directly to Google servers. And even a bunch of other things on their devices unfortunately don't use like on-device processing, which is kind of frustrating, especially because, they do have 16 gigabytes of RAM now. They do have the ability to run a lot of these AI processes locally, but yeah, they like to offload a lot of that to the cloud, which is pretty terrible when it comes to your privacy.
Mm. Yeah. I think it's it's definitely like an interesting like thing where by using something like graphene on a Pixel device, you remove almost the entire value proposition of a Google phone, and but you keep the good camera, well nowadays decent camera, and security and privacy features, which the Pixel does an amazing job at. So it's like you sacrifice a lot with like GrapheneOS, so you don't really want to like remove more like of the value of a phone by just installing it. So I feel like with the new OEM, um, you can game on it, you can have better battery life with it, and you just have a generally like better like end user experience, but just like with this hypothetical phone. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think like hardware is definitely like a huge aspect of what you need for a phone, and I think the Pixels has not been the best lately, despite its security features.
Yeah, so I think at this point, like we're kind of getting pretty far into the show and we're nearing the 2 hour mark here, so I don't want to take up too much of Kevin's time. So let's try and end out the show pretty soon. But let's just take a quick look and make sure we've covered all the other questions. I think we've talked about this for quite a while. Let's just double check I haven't missed anything. There was a question from Johnny Gossamer about my question is, could you run down the requirements GrapheneOS has for hardware on which they will make their OS available? Also speculate within reason for which types of hardware from which company is most likely to fit the bill. So yeah, I think we've talked about that a bit, like OnePlus, Nothing, a couple of different ones. So I feel like we've covered that a
Um,
little bit earlier, but
Yeah, we did, but like just to push back a little bit, I believe like I remember looking at the form itself and like seeing the initial discussion about it. It's specifically like the top 10 devices, right? And a really interesting, I noticed like Nothing in Motorola they don't technically meet the top 10 requirement. So we don't really know what graphene is staying here. Like, is it top 10 by market share or top 10 by, anything else or any other metric? But I think like generally what we do agree on is like this device will support MTE. This device will have a secure element. It may not be as robust as Pixel, but I think like assuming that this device is readily available, is priced at $799, with the same price as the Pixel, probably something like Motorola, OnePlus, uh, maybe some other like Chinese made phone like Oppo or like I don't know. Like, there isn't like a lot here. Maybe Samsung if they like change their mind on like the whole like bootloader unlocking like process. But yeah, it's like there's not a lot of options, ironically enough. Nothing. We don't think so because they apparently Graphene confirmed that it's not a European OEM. So if it's not based in Europe, that kind of like removes like Nothing and like a bunch of other like OEMs like HMD and I think that's it, right? I don't know. But yeah, it's like we only have a few options. Most of them are either Chinese made or Samsung, I'd say,
yeah, no,
and
that's good
potential
points.
Sony. Yeah, yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I haven't been following it super closely, so thanks for like covering that. I wasn't sure whether they said European, like not European or not. But yeah, I
Mm,
don't know. I would have liked to see Nothing or HMD just because I kind of like what they're doing. But yeah,
mm,
I guess we'll kind of see where it comes. It's looking more like it's going to be a Chinese OEM, but
mm.
don't really have an issue with that personally. But I think we'll see what that looks like in the future because right now we're just sort of speculating. But was there any other questions you thought we should cover before we close things out here?
Yeah, I'm just gonna look at a few polls. Most 80% of people hate Firefox new features. 80% of people think Motorola will be the new OEM, followed by 1% thinks it's Sony. Only one can dream. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it, Jess. I think like there's a lot of really good conversation about like, you know, about the topics today. So I really want to thank everyone for actually engaging in the chat, engaging in the forum, and then really like giving your honest opinion on things. We really appreciate that. I think like just one of the first streams we got where, wow, people are engaging. And it's really nice to see like this community like come together and like really discuss this topic, which I know that a lot of us are very excited for. And we often get a lot of bad news, and it's really nice to have some good news in the horizon. So thank you so much for supporting us in this community. And yeah, I'll leave it to Jordan to end it off.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. I agree. It's been so cool seeing so many people like talking about this and discussing it. It was like kind of a huge discussion on our forum this week. So that was so awesome to see everyone sort of chiming in, letting us know what they think. And yeah, so thanks, Kevin, for that. And now we'll kind of go into the end of the stream here. As usual, all the updates from This Week in Privacy will be shared on the blog every week, so you can subscribe with your favorite RSS reader, or you can also subscribe to our newsletter so you can receive updates every time we have a podcast episode. So for people who prefer audio, we also have a podcast style recording, so you can also subscribe to that in your favorite podcast app. And also just remember that we will be sharing this live stream on PeerTube as well if you want to watch that later. That's always available if you want to check it out. And as always, Privacy Guides is an independent nonprofit, and we rely entirely on our community for financial support. So if you do like what we're doing, please consider making a donation. You can do that on our website at privacyguides.org. And if you head to the main page, you'll see there's a red heart in the top right hand corner. And if you click that, there'll be an option to either become a member, which gives you exclusive access to early videos. So if you want to check out the videos before everyone else has access, check it out. And that will also give you a little badge on the forum and will answer your questions early as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you can press that to become a member. You can also just make a one-time donation, and you can do that you can do either of those things as well in cryptocurrencies such as Monero, Bitcoin, anything like that. And you can also use a credit card if that's what you would prefer. So thank you so much to our members for supporting our work. And if that does sound like something you're interested in, definitely check it out and support us. And I guess that goes with saying this has been a great episode. Thank you, Kevin, so much for coming on and discussing things with me this week.
And thank you, Jordan, for always hosting every single episode. I admire that, honestly. I understand if the times were different, like pretty tough at the time, but you carry like this live stream a lot, and without your support, I think like, we definitely need a lot of help. So thank you so much, Jordan.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so that's going to be it this week. We'll see you next week. And thanks so much for watching, everybody.
All right, goodbye, everyone.